All right, y'all, let's do a classic. Let's do Shutter Island. You got this guy by the name of Teddy. He's traveling on a boat and he's chilling with this dude by the name of Chuck. Apparently, they're both supposed to be detectives or deputies or whatever like that, and they landed on this island. Now, we found out he used to have a wife by the name of Dolores, but she ended up getting burnt up in her apartment at a house fire, so she's done deal. Then when they get to the island, they're talking to the police guards and stuff like that. Now, this island is basically meant for mentally induced patients, and they got police guarding it. They got electrical fences and whatnot. And this island is like 11 miles away from the homeland. Basically, there's no way to get off it unless you're getting on the ferry. And police are the only ones that can escort them off the island. Then they tell them it's three parts of the island. Ward A is for males, Ward B is for females, Ward C is for like the most dangerous criminals and whatnot. So then they go to the main spot and they meet Dr. Cramley. He's like the main facilitator of this patient hospital ward or, island basically. So they're there to find this patient by the name of Rachel Zalato. Now, nobody ever really escapes this place, but for some reason, she was somehow able to escape. But the thing is, you can only unlock the doors from the outside, and the one window that she has in the room is barred up. So it's like, how the fuck did she get out? So then they start talking to the staff and found out the only way she could even attempt to get out is if she left like during like lunch or something. But even then, there's a guard by the name of Glenn that they would have to go past to. Now, we found out she actually could have escaped because Glenn for like 5 seconds had went to the bathroom. So he's trying to find clues in the room and he finds this one piece of paper. It says a law of 4 and it says who is 67. So obviously Teddy hangs on to that paper for evidence. Now every now and then Teddy gets these headaches and he gotta get they give him some aspirin and get some water and stuff like that. But he ended up getting one of these headaches at the beginning because he was getting seasick from the boat or whatever. This occurs randomly throughout the movie. I'll explain why in a minute though. So Teddy and Chuck are trying to get evidence on like the people that are working there, everything like that. They need some like medical records and stuff like that. But Dr. Cramley is acting very hesitant to give him this information. He's like, yeah, I'll get it in due time or whatever. Like, so you're thinking to yourself, why wouldn't he give him the evidence he needs to find a patient that's missing? He tells him he can go out there with the police. They're having a search or whatever like that. So they start searching around the grounds. And of course, they ain't find nothing. Then he looks over to the side like, what's that? It's like this lighthouse. But because of the terrain, there's no way anybody could get to it, especially Rachel, because the situation was she had 2 pairs of shoes. Now, the thing is, they give all the patients 2 pairs of shoes or whatever like that for, I don't know, throughout the day. The thing was, both pairs of shoes are still in their room. So obviously, we think to ourselves, she's barefoot. Nobody could get to this terrain on level ground, let alone barefoot. So later on, he starts interrogating some of the patients, right? One patient's in there because he tore this lady's face off. I was like, the fuck? They had this other patient in there. She's like all cool, calm, and collected, whatever like that, until we found out she actually asked her husband. I'm like, fuck. Something about him cheating and all this other stuff. But anyway. So when she asks Chuck if she get a glass of water, Chuck goes against the water. Then she steals Teddy's notebook and writes something in there and gives it back to him real quick. And he's looking at the message and he covers the notebook. We're like, what the fuck did she write in there? Basically, later on, he read the message and told him to run. I'm like, fuck. So every now and then he gets these flashbacks about the war. And he killed a lot of people in these wars. And then we get this one flashback where he's just chilling with his wife, Dolores. And she keeps telling him, like, Rachel, she's here. But someone else is here, too. Somebody by the name of Thaddeus. Andrew Ladius, my bad. So we're thinking to ourselves, who the fuck is Andrew Ladius? So Chuck had figured out, he said his name a couple times. He's like, look, you gotta let me in on this. Like, who is Andrew? Turns out Andrew was the janitor that was in the apartment of his wife. He's a pyromaniac. He ended up lighting a match that ended up burning the building that killed his wife. So it's this big, crazy storm coming. And Teddy's basically getting pissed off because he's not getting enough evidence from Dr. Cramley or, information from him to help out the case. So him and Chuck head out on their own. They all go out, but the storm gets crazy or whatever like that. They end up hiding him in this random tomb, just waiting in there until the storm blows over. So while they're in there, Chuck is like, so what are you really here to do? Are you really here to kill Andrew? I mean, like, what's going on? The thing is, he doesn't want to kill Andrew. And because of his backstory, he's had enough of killing. His real purpose in being there is to find out what exactly is going on this island. Because he's heard things over the years about Nazis and people doing brain testing and all this other stuff like lobotomies and shit. And he thinks the island has something to do with it. So the police finally found him in a tomb. They like soaking wet. So while their clothes are getting dry, they have him put on some institutional wear. Basically, they got to wear all white. Now, while they're getting changed, we hear Dr. Cramley and a lot of other people talking or whatever. And Teddy comes in and interrupts their conversation. He starts thinking about what the letter meant, what's the laws of 4s, and who is 67. We figured out what the 67 number means. So apparently all the patients in Ward A and B add up to 24. Add up to 42, my bad. But the patients in Ward C add up to 24. Therefore, making it 66 patients. So that's the question we're asking. Who the fuck is a 67 patient? So as we try to figure out all these questions, all of a sudden, Dr. Cramley's like, oh, we found Rachel. Like, the fuck? So apparently the thing with Rachel is, she's in there because she drowned her 3 kids and killed her husband, Jim. But afterwards, she sat with her kids at the table. They all sat there like, yeah, we're about to just start eating together. So in her mind, her kids are still alive. And she thinks she's in this nice neighborhood like Brunswick somewhere. But obviously, she's on this island. So her mind is completely gone. She thinks all the inmates and prison guards and things like that, she thinks they're all just like the milkman, the postman, the delivery man and stuff like that. It's like, it's crazy. So when Teddy's going to talk to her, as a cop trying to ask her questions, he's got to talk to her as if her mind is still stuck in Mayberry or some shit. Then she actually confuses Teddy for Jim. Then she gives him a hug like she missed him so much, and then she snaps out of it. It's like, wait a minute. You're not Jim. You're dead. When I opened the casket, I know it was empty, but I saw you in there. I'm like, what the fuck? Then she starts spazzing out. That's when Jim has to leave. Teddy has to leave the room. So it gets to a point where Teddy's thinking to himself, like, all right, the case is done. You know what I'm saying? And all of a sudden he starts getting the headaches again. Then they got to take him to one of the wards so he can sleep at for the night. Because they don't really have any regular beds in regular rooms. They're just all in ward rooms. And besides, nobody's getting off the island at night, man. It's a ridiculous ass storm. And once again, the ferries will only come when the police come and decide to, take them off the island. But like I said, the storm's ridiculous. No ferry's coming out there for this shit. He ends up seeing this one police officer where they tell him he's the warden. He'll see him again later on. So later on, Teddy and Chuck escape to this spot, and Teddy wants to go to this damn lighthouse to figure out some things. But he doesn't really trust Chuck right now because of some things that have been told to him. Hold on, let me tell you why this happens. Teddy and Chuck end up sneaking into the Ward C, where all the crazy motherfuckers at. They end up sneaking in the ward. All of a sudden, one prisoner comes out of nowhere, is like, tag, you're it, and starts running around. So Teddy starts chasing after him. Chuck loses pace of him. All of a sudden, the prisoner sneaks up behind Teddy. He's talking about some hydraulic bombs and all this other shit. And then Teddy gets a upper hand, starts whipping his ass. Then Chuck comes back and finds him. One of the prison guards get the guy off him. He's like, no, man, just go walk around, man. You trying to get me in trouble. So both Chuck and the prison guard carry out the prisoner or whatever like that. Meanwhile, Teddy's still walking around. So the whole purpose Teddy is there is to look for the dude, Andrew Latus. But it turns out he ends up finding this guy by the name of George Noyce. George is saying all these things, basically telling him like, yeah, you're the reason why I'm in here. He's like, what? Something about a fight happening, something like that. But Teddy don't believe none of this shit. And then George is telling him like, look, you got to let her go. All of a sudden he keeps seeing Dolores again. She's like, you got to let me go before it's too late. And then George tells him a lot of stuff like not trusting the things around you and all this other stuff. Going into details too long. It's pretty crazy. You got to watch it for yourself. So it gets to a point where Teddy's got to sneak out to make sure he was not there involved in the incident with the prisoner or whatever like that. The patient. And then this is what happens after like Chuck and Teddy get together and he's trying to go to this lighthouse. And this is when he starts having questioning Chuck or whatever. But he wants him to stay still while he goes to this lighthouse. And the terrain is ridiculously impossible to get to. And all of a sudden he gets to this rock part and he sees a lit cigarette just sitting there. He's like, who the fuck was over here? And his vision starts going crazy. He looks down, he thinks he sees Chuck on the ground. We're like, what the fuck? Now, Chuck apparently has some paperwork or whatever like that. So when he started climbing down the rocks, he sees the paperwork flying around and he's actually able to get it and put it in his pocket. This paperwork is supposed to be work on Andrew Latus. So we're like, oh shit. But he never got the chance to read it. So he somehow gets down to the bottom of the rocks, but he doesn't see no body there and doesn't see anything. All of a sudden, rats start coming out of the daggone walls and shit. We're like, what the fuck? But then he looks up and sees like a fire lit in one of the caves. So he's like, who the hell could that be? So he goes through the rats, climbs back up the little spot, and he goes inside the cave. Then we find this lady in there with a knife. It turns out she's actually the real Rachel. What the fuck? The Rachel they have back at the asylum has her mind exited. Like, what? Then this Rachel tells him that she actually used to be a nurse at the place. But it turns out she was asking questions about neurological drugs and things of that nature. It turns out she says they do lobotomy and things of that nature here. She said they basically use a pick to go inside of your eye, pull the nerves out, and then it causes brain damage or something. But it says they're able to control the nerves in your body. We don't have to experience pain, fear, all this other stuff. I'm like, oh shit. And apparently all this shit takes place in the lighthouse. So he's like, I'm gonna do my best to get you up out of here. She's like, ain't no way I'm getting up out of here. She's like, I gotta move from place to place. And besides, the only way I get out of here is if the police take me off on the ferry. You know that shit ain't happening. She's like, these motherfuckers still think I'm dead. He gets back up on the main ground. The police officer ends up picking him up. You know what I'm saying? He said he was just going for a walk or whatever like that. Turns out the guy that picked him up was actually the guy he thought was the warden. Their scene is freaking intense. That's all I gotta say about that. So when he goes back to the spot, now he's thinking in his head, these motherfuckers are experimenting on Chuck because he can't find them nowhere. So he goes to Dr. Cramley Band saying he could basically get off this island because we found Rachel. Everything's good, right? He was like, can you tell me something? Where's Chuck? He's like, there's no Chuck. You came over here by yourself. So now Teddy's thinking, what the fuck is going on? So the only way he's going to get his answers at that damn lighthouse. He somehow makes it back down to the bottom so he can swim across to the lighthouse. There's like one guard guarding it. He ends up knocking the guard out. They go upside. He goes inside the lighthouse. When he kicks down the door at the top of the lighthouse, Dr. Cramley's just sitting in there chilling like, yo, it took you long enough. Have a seat. So apparently Dr. Cramley knew he had some paperwork in his back pocket. He's like, yo, read the paperwork. It talks about Andrew being in there for war crimes and things of that nature. We're like, oh shit. Then Dr. Cramley pulls out this draw board and he talks about the laws of war, right? Now he's got these two names that he made up. Teddy's real name is like Edward something. And there was another name that he gave Dolores, his wife Dolores, but that's Dolores is her real name. But it turns out Edward is really Andrew. That's right. Teddy's really fucking Andrew. We're like, what? So he tells him the Rachel that he met and the Rachel that was in the cave were figments of his imagination. They don't exist. All this nonsense about the mission, like that's never happened. They say, yeah, he's here because of the war, but the thing is, he got disbarred 2 years ago. He's been on this island for 2 years. So now he's trying to figure out where the fuck is Chuck at. And then Chuck just rolls in all of a sudden, just fine and dandy. Now, at the beginning, when Rachel was supposedly missing, they was talking about this doctor named Dr. Sheenan. Now, Dr. Sheenan actually went on vacation right around the time where Rachel disappeared. Coincidence? So they weren't trying to give him the files of Dr. Sheenan, but they said we'll try to call him anytime we get available or whatever like that. But bottom line is the storm knocked the power out and blah, blah, blah. Turns out the real story, Chuck is actually Dr. Sheenan. And on top of that, he's actually Andrew's psychiatrist. Now, at the beginning of the movie, Teddy and Chuck were escorted to the island by the police, but they were like, we need you to give your guns up or whatever like that before we give you interest or whatever. So they was able to give the guns up and then they had access. So now back to the lighthouse. Andrew can't take all this newfound information. He ends up picking up the gun off the table, which was supposed Chuck's gun, right? He ends up shooting at Dr. Cramley, but it turns out it ain't do nothing. It was a fucking toy gun. So Dr. Cramley explains the situation like, look, we've been keeping you here for the longest time, and we needed to conduct this experiment to make sure you were okay. The problem is, he tried to take out most of the guards during this experiment. And it turns out Andrew was technically the most dangerous person on the fucking island. The thing is, Dr. Cramley really wanted to make this thing work because people outside of that was having problems with the situation. Basically, if he doesn't get cured of this, he's going to get the death penalty. Then he starts showing the pictures of the 3 little girls. Turns out, they're actually his kids. His wife, Dolores, actually were the one that killed all 3 of her kids. Turns out the youngest kid that kept coming into his dreams was named Rachel. The thing is, there was no fire that killed Dolores. So we get this flashback scene to when Teddy or Andrew was coming home, and they lived in this lake house. He goes outside to see Dolores just sitting on his bench. Then she comes over to hug her husband and everything like that, and he starts looking around as the screen's spinning around. We're like, wait a minute, where's the kids? She's like, they're in school, I gave them lunch. He's like, today's Saturday. Then he looks out into the water and he sees bodies in the water. It's like, oh shit, all 3 of his kids are drowned in the fucking water. Then after he picked them up and put them on the grass, she started hugging them and it was like, she's talking about we can still have lunch in the house all together as a family. I'm like, this bitch is gone. Then she's like, yeah, just set me free. Then all of a sudden he just shot her, done deal, dead as shit. So apparently Dr. Cramley, within 9 months of this treatment, he was able to, fix his mind or whatever like that. But the problem is he went back into that scenario again. So he thought by giving Andrew this method, that it would cure him of his afflictions, and he could finally, deal with the fact that he did this to his wife and his wife did this to her kids. Next thing you know, he wakes up in the ward. Dr. Cramley's there, Dr. Sherman's there, and the girl he thought was the original Rachel actually turns out to be a nurse there. So he goes there and starts admitting like everything is all good or whatever like that, right? So when Andrew's sitting outside, right, he ends up meeting Dr. Sherman or whatever. And they're just chilling outside on the porch, not realizing Dr. Cramley and everybody else is like standing over there just trying to figure out the session or whatever like that. So Andrew's talking to Dr. Sherman, and the crazy thing is he starts calling him Chuck again. So basically he's back to his adventure kick. So Dr. Sherman looks over at Dr. Cramley and is like, last thing you see is Andrew being escorted by a bunch of cops or whatever to the ferry. So I'm assuming from that point, they probably gave him the death penalty. Yeah, I know this movie came out over a decade ago, but this shit was fucking nuts. If you can still catch it, Shutter Island on Netflix. Check that shit out.